Hello there, and welcome to this day in history for December 4th. December 4th is the 338th day of the year in the Gregorian calendar, with 27 days remaining to the end of the year. And I don't know if you'll be able to hear the crows out there, but they are out there throwing a concert or something, I guess. They're making all kinds of noise. Of course, they're not right now when I'm talking about it, but you might hear them. They're pretty loud. Crows. I used to find them annoying, but now I appreciate and admire their intelligence. Anyway, today we're going to start in the year 1780, when George Washington's cousin tricked Loyalists. A force of Continental Dragoons commanded by Colonel William Washington, General George Washington's second cousin once removed, cornered Loyalist Colonel Roland Rugeley and his followers in Rugeley's house and barn near Camden, South Carolina on December 4th, 1780. Now, after a year of brutal backcountry conflict between Washington and the fierce British commander Lieutenant Colonel Tarleton, who was infamous for Tarleton's Quarter, the murder of colonial POWs on May 29, 1780 at Waxhaws, Washington had retreated to North Carolina the previous October. Commanded to return to the South Carolina Theater by Brigadier General Daniel the Old Wagoner Morgan, Colonel Washington still lacked the proper artillery to dislodge the Loyalists. He told his cavalrymen to dismount and surround the barn. While out of Rugeley's sight, Washington's men fabricated a pine log to resemble a cannon. This Quaker gun trick, named so because Quakers used it to be intimidating without breaching their pacifist vow of nonviolence, worked beautifully. Washington faced the cannon toward the buildings in which the Loyalists had barricaded themselves and threatened bombardment if they did not surrender. Shortly after, Rugeley surrendered his entire force without a single shot being fired. In 1783, George Washington bid farewell to his officers. He summoned his military officers to Fraunce's Tavern in New York City to inform them that he would be resigning his commission and returning to civilian life. In 1791, the first edition of The Observer, the world's first Sunday newspaper, was published. In 1865, North Carolina ratified the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, followed soon by Georgia, and U.S. slaves were legally free within 2 weeks. In 1867, Oliver Kelly organized the Grange. He grew up in Boston, but he decided early on that he wanted to be a farmer. And so, in 1849, he booked passage on a steamboat for St. Paul, Minnesota. At that time, the Minnesota area was dominated more by Indian trade than farming, but Kelly shrewdly saw that the future of this region lay in agriculture. He proved to be a skilled and progressive farmer. He gained local fame for boldly experimenting with new crops, installing an elaborate irrigation system, and buying one of the first mechanical reapers in the state. His attempts at scientific farming and a series of columns he wrote for national newspapers brought him national recognition. In 1864, he won a prestigious clerking position under the Federal Commissioner of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. While on a tour of southern farms in 1866, Kelly was struck by the warm reception he received from his fellow Masons in the South, given the pervasive dislike of Northerners left over from the Civil War. Determined to develop a national organization to unify farmers, he returned to Washington and gathered a group of like-minded friends, and in 1867 these men became the founders of the Order of Patrons of Husbandry, better known as the Grange. Although the Grange, like the Masons, began primarily as a social organization designed to provide educational and recreational opportunities for farmers, it did evolve into a major political force. Farmers who gathered at the local Grange halls voiced similar complaints about the high rates charged by warehouses and railroads to handle their grain, and they began to organize for state and federal controls over these pivotal economic issues. The Grange also smartly recognized the importance of including women, who often proved to be the organization's most dedicated members. The Grange's political activism resulted in a flurry of legislation that became known as Granger laws, which were not very effective in solving the farmers' problem with the railroads and warehouses, but did provide crucial precedent for state and federal regulation of private enterprise for the public interest. The laws were passed in 5 Midwestern states And in decades to come, politicians took a cue from the Granger laws and created controls over many big business industries on the grounds that governmental regulations were essential to protect the interests of all the people, not just the farmers. The Grange also played a key role in creating the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887, which called for the first federal regulation of railroads to control unfair shipping rates. And this story about the Grange caught my eye because when I lived in central New York, I saw some actual Grange halls, pretty good-sized buildings where people could meet up for community dinners and such. In 1875, this is the day that notorious New York City politician Boss Tweed escaped from prison. He was later recaptured in Spain, and I believe we talked about that in a previous episode. In 1881, the first edition of the Los Angeles Times was published. In 1917, a psychiatrist reported on a phenomenon he called shell shock. Nowadays, we call this phenomenon post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It's a real thing, all right. All sorts of traumatizing events can produce it. If you have PTSD, you probably know it, but I've included a link to a page with more information about PTSD and ideas about how someone who has it can be helped. You can find that in the show notes. In 1918, United States President Woodrow Wilson sailed for the World War I peace talks in Versailles, becoming the first U.S. president to travel to Europe while in office. In 1928, the Irish Godfather was killed by a car bomb in St. Paul. Dapper Dan Hogan, a St. Paul, Minnesota saloon keeper and mob boss, was killed on December 4th, 1928, when someone planted a car bomb under the floorboards of his new Page coupe. 1937, December 4th, is the birthday of American actor, director, and producer Max Baer Jr. He's perhaps most well known for his portrayal of Jethro Bodine in the TV show The Beverly Hillbillies. If I remember correctly, he was also a pretty good skeet shooter. Someone can correct me in the comments if I've gotten that wrong. 1942, Polish Christians come to the aid of Polish Jews. In Warsaw, a group of Polish Christians put their own lives at risk when they set up the Council for the Assistance of Jews. 1949, this is the birthday of American actor Jeff Bridges. 1952, oh my, smog kills thousands in England. Heavy smog began to hover over London, England on December 4th, 1952, and persisted for 5 days, leading to the deaths of at least 4,000 people. Now, what is smog? It's a combination of fog and smoke. And for anybody who doesn't live or hasn't ever been to a place where fog rolls in and stays for days and days, I can tell you that that does happen. Anyone who does live in such an area knows what I'm talking about. I remember driving out of Cooperstown to go to Albany and going through a really thick fog up around Cherry Valley. We took to calling it Foggy Valley. Anyway, combine a heavy fog like that, a heavy and persistent fog, with perpetual smoke, and you've got smog. In that time, most people heated their homes with coal, which burns hot, keep you warm, right? But it does produce a fairly dirty smoke. Being December, you know it was cold, so there was definitely plenty of that kind of smoke. In addition, there was some industry around there, and they produced some smoke of their own, and even dirtier than just ordinary household coal smoke. Now, ordinarily, such smoke would drift away, be carried away by the winds, or, settle on the buildings and the grounds. But when this fog rolled in, it was kept in suspension right in the air there instead of dissipating. Kept that smoke suspended in the air. And each day that the fog remained, more smoke was gathered up in the fog, so the smog became more intense. People couldn't help but breathe it in, nor could their livestock. They most likely didn't know about wearing some kind of a mask to block the particulates from their breathing. Some people just breathed in so much junk that they just flat suffocated. The period between December 4th and December 8th saw such a marked increase in death in the London metropolitan area that most conservative estimates place the death toll at 4,000, with some estimating that the smog killed as many as 12,000 people. In 1954, the first Burger King was opened in Miami, Florida. In 1956, the Million Dollar Quartet, Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Johnny Cash got together at Sun Studio for the first and last time. In 1964, a free speech movement took place by college students. Police arrested over 800 students at the University of California, Berkeley following their takeover and sit-in at the administration building in protest of the UC Regent's decision to forbid protests on UC property. 1964, December 4th, is the birthday of American actress Marissa Tomei. 1965, the Grateful Dead's first concert performance under this new name. They'd been playing together for a while, but this was the first time as the Grateful Dead. 1967, American actor Bert Lahr died on this date. He's best known for his portrayal of the Cowardly Lion in the MGM adaptation of The Wizard of Oz. He was 72 when he passed. 1978, following the murder of Mayor George Moscone, Diane Feinstein became San Francisco's first female mayor. In 1991, hostage Terry Anderson was freed in Lebanon. Islamic militants in Lebanon released kidnapped American journalist Terry Anderson after 2,454 days in captivity. That's about 6.5 years. That's a long time to be a captive. Anderson returned to the U.S. and was reunited with his family, including his little daughter that he'd never even seen before because she was born about 3 months after he was captured. In 1999, he sued the Iranian government for $100 million, accusing it of sponsoring the kidnappers. He received a multi-million-dollar settlement. In 1992, President Bush ordered U.S. troops to Somalia. He ordered 28,000 U.S. troops to Somalia, a war-torn East African nation where rival warlords were preventing the distribution of humanitarian aid to thousands of starving Somalis. In 2009, on December 4th, Amanda Knox was convicted of murder in Italy. 22-year-old American exchange student Amanda Knox was convicted of murdering her British roommate Meredith Kircher in 2007 in Perugia, Italy. Now, Knox received a 26-year prison sentence, while her 25-year-old Italian ex-boyfriend, Raffaele Solicito, was also convicted in the slaying, and he got 25 years behind bars. After a harrowing series of conviction, acquittal, reversal of that acquittal, they were finally fully exonerated in 2015. In 2012, Typhoon Pablo kills over 1,000 people in the Philippines, mostly due to rushing floodwaters that destroyed entire villages in what was the strongest typhoon ever to strike the Southeast Asian islands. And I think that's going to do it for us today. As always, links to my research are included in the show notes. Thank you so much for watching. Give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and be sure to click that little bell so you can get a reminder when my videos are published. Check out my other channel, 8 Susquehanna, while you're at it. There's a link to that in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Okie dokie, Smokey. Let's say that again. Blah, 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 coffee mug. It's late enough in the day that we're off coffee and on fizzy water. Just read the words. Just read the words. That's a lot of words. Okay, now let's one more time. Hope I pronounced that right. Thank goodness for editing. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? She's not a man. This is why I don't do live shows.